There are moments in American politics when something happens in plain sight, spoken into microphones, reported in transcripts, and yet somehow inexplicably passes through the public consciousness like a ghost. This is one of those moments. On a day when the news cycle was crowded with the usual din of partisan argument and cable television theatrics, Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, said something that should have stopped everyone in their tracks. But it didn't. The networks moved on. The social media algorithm pushed other stories forward. And by the next morning, it was buried under layers of newer outrage and fresher scandals. But here's what we've learned from studying political movements, from understanding how power actually operates in Washington. The things nobody is talking about are often the things that matter most. Schumer didn't make some inflammatory statement. He didn't engage in the kind of partisan theater we've come to expect from leadership on either side of the aisle. Instead, he did something more strategic. He exposed something. He pulled back a curtain on what sources indicate Trump's team has been quietly positioning what analysts believe represents a carefully constructed plan for his next phase of political influence. And the implications, if you follow the threads, are significant. You see, in Washington, there's a difference between what politicians say publicly and what they're actually doing in the rooms where decisions get made. There's a difference between the narrative that dominates cable news and the strategic reality that's unfolding beneath it. Schumer, through his comments, revealed that gap. He essentially acknowledged that there is a blueprint, there is a plan, and it's been underestimated by most observers. What makes this moment different is not just what was said, but what wasn't said afterward. There was no immediate pushback from Trump's team. There was no frantic damage control. There was, in many quarters, silence. And that silence, frankly, speaks volumes. Because when political operatives don't deny something, when they let an accusation or revelation simply hang in the air without rebuttal, it often means one of two things. Either they can't refute it, or they don't need to. This is where the story becomes worth telling. This is where we need to look closer. Chuck Schumer is not a man given to dramatic gestures. He is, by most accounts, a methodical politician. He calculates, he strategizes, he builds coalitions slowly, quietly, away from the glare of cameras whenever possible. This is a man who has navigated Washington through Republican majorities and Democratic ones, through presidencies of both parties, through fiscal cliffs and shutdown standoffs, and the intricate dance of legislative compromise. So when Schumer chose to make these comments, when he decided that this moment warranted stepping into the spotlight, it signified something. It suggested that whatever he was revealing had crossed a threshold. It had become, in his estimation, necessary for public awareness. Reports indicate that Schumer's comments centered on what he characterized as a systematic approach Trump's team has been developing. Sources close to the Senate leadership confirm that Schumer framed this not as partisan complaint, but as institutional concern. He wasn't simply opposing Trump, he was warning about a pattern. And here's the critical part. He did this knowing full well that it would be seized upon by media outlets and Democratic activists as ammunition. He did this knowing that his words would be weaponized politically. Yet, he did it anyway. Which means that, in his judgment, the warning itself was more important than controlling the narrative around it. What was he warning about specifically? According to multiple analysts who studied Schumer's statement, he was pointing to what appears to be a coordinated effort to position Trump's influence beyond traditional electoral channels. He was suggesting deliberately, carefully, that the focus shouldn't be on whether Trump runs for office again, but on how he's consolidating power regardless of electoral outcomes. Think about what that means. Think about the strategic patience that requires. Think about how it changes the calculation for everyone involved. Schumer, by breaking ranks from the kind of partisan response we might expect, was essentially saying, this isn't about 2024 or 2026. This is about something deeper. This is about a fundamental repositioning of political power. And the response, or lack thereof, told us something important. When Trump's team didn't aggressively counter Schumer's framing, when they didn't mount a public defense, it suggested two possibilities. Either they knew he was right, or they were confident enough in their positioning that the denial would be unnecessary. Both scenarios carry weight. If you step back from the day-to-day noise and look at what's actually been happening over the past 18 months, a picture emerges. It's not the picture that cable news presents. It's not the picture that most political commentary focuses on. But it's there, if you look carefully. Trump's team hasn't been simply preparing for a campaign. They've been building something more durable than that. They've been constructing what strategists call a parallel political structure. What does that mean? It means developing independent media channels. It means cultivating relationships with state-level operatives who no longer need to answer to the Republican National Committee. It means establishing financial pipelines that don't depend on traditional donor networks. It means, in essence, creating a political machine that operates on its own terms, according to its own logic, independent of whether Trump is running for office. And analysts note that this approach has a particular strategic. It's resilient to electoral defeat. If Trump loses an election, this structure remains. If Republican leadership distances itself, this structure remains. If legal challenges accumulate, this structure remains. Because it's not contingent on any single office or any single outcome. This is what appears to have concerned Schumer enough to speak publicly about it. Historically, presidential influence after leaving office has been limited. Former presidents could speak, could endorse, could raise money, but their actual power diminished considerably. The presidency is uniquely positioned to command attention and resources and institutional loyalty in ways that private life is not. What Trump's team seems to be doing, and this is what observers believe Schumer was obliquely referencing, is trying to reverse that equation. They're trying to maintain or even amplify presidential-level influence without requiring the presidency itself. Is it sustainable? Analysts debate this. Some argue that without the actual machinery of federal office, this structure will eventually weaken. Others contend that in an age of direct media access, decentralized fundraising, and personality-driven politics, the traditional sources of presidential power matter less than they once did. But here's what seems clear. Someone in Schumer's position, someone with access to classified briefings, intelligence reports, and deep knowledge of Republican strategy, clearly believes this initiative is far enough along to warrant warning the country about it. And that, perhaps, is the most telling detail of all. Here's where it gets complicated. And it's complicated in a way that most political analysts have failed to adequately explain. The traditional assumption about American politics is that power flows from elections. You win elections, you gain office, you exercise power, you lose elections, your power diminishes. It's linear. It's predictable. It's the framework we've used to understand American politics for generations. But what if you didn't accept that framework? What if you built a different system? Sources indicate that Trump's team has been systematically doing exactly that. They've been constructing a network of media properties not all explicitly aligned with Trump, but strategically positioned to amplify his messaging and marginalize his opposition. They've been cultivating relationships with state legislators and governors who have their own ambitions and their own reasons to cooperate. They've been building financial structures that can sustain political activity without depending on traditional party machinery. And they've been doing this while most of Washington was looking somewhere else. Part of the reason this has escaped serious scrutiny is structural. The media focuses on electoral politics because elections are concrete events with clear outcomes. You can cover a campaign. You can report on polls. You can analyze debate performances. But this slow-building construction of networked influence, it doesn't fit neatly into news cycles. It requires sustained investigation. It requires understanding how dozens of seemingly unrelated developments connect into a larger pattern. Schumer, speaking from his position of institutional knowledge, was essentially doing what political leadership should do, pointing out that pattern before it became too late to reckon with it honestly. And the response again, the notable lack of aggressive rebuttal suggested that observers within Republican circles were well aware of what Schumer was describing. They weren't shocked by his revelation because it wasn't a revelation to them. It was a confirmation. It was public acknowledgement of something they already knew was happening. Think about the implications of that. Think about a political strategy so advanced, so accepted within its own ranks, that the opposing party leader essentially calling it out generates no real defensive response. It suggests confidence, or it suggests inevitability, or perhaps both. And that's where the calculation becomes urgent. Because if this structure is real, if it's as advanced as sources suggest, then the conventional political timeline, the one that assumes power cycles through elections, may no longer apply. The question then becomes not whether this will matter, but when and how, and what can be done about it now. What happened after Schumer spoke? On one level, nothing. The news cycle moved on. The partisan talking points adjusted accordingly. Democratic media outlets called it a warning. Republican outlets called it partisan overreach. The debate played out in the usual channels, according to the usual scripts. But beneath that surface, something more significant was occurring. Schumer's comments created what strategists call a framing problem for Trump's team. By naming the strategy, by drawing attention to the systematic nature of it, Schumer forced them into a position where they had to acknowledge, defend, or deny something they might have preferred to simply build quietly. And they chose, in many cases, to neither aggressively deny nor extensively defend. They chose a middle path. Acknowledgement without apology, a kind of, yes, we're building this and we don't think there's anything wrong with it positioning. This has implications. First, it signals to Republican operatives and allies that this strategy has enough backing and momentum to be spoken about openly. The silence, the lack of rebuke, amounts to institutional approval. Second, it puts pressure on Democrats to develop a counter-strategy. You can't simply oppose something this fundamental with the usual legislative or electoral approaches. You need to think differently. You need to build differently. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it accelerates the timeline. When something that was operating in relative obscurity gets exposed publicly, it changes the dynamics. Actors move faster. They're no longer simply building in shadows. They're building with awareness that they're being watched. And that awareness changes how they build. Analysts suggest that what Schumer essentially did was force the playing field to be more transparent. He pulled back the curtain. He said plainly, this is what's happening. Everybody now knows this is happening. So now let's discuss it, which is strategic brilliance, actually. Because once something is in the open, once it's named and acknowledged, it becomes subject to different kinds of scrutiny and different kinds of response. You can't quietly consolidate power if everyone's watching you consolidate power. The real question, then, isn't whether Trump's team was building this network. Reports suggest they were. Sources confirm that they are. The real question is, now that it's been exposed, what does everyone do next? When you study political history, when you look at how power actually consolidates, how influence actually persists, how political movements actually endure, you find that the most consequential developments are rarely the ones that dominate the headlines. They're the quiet ones. They're the structural ones. They're the ones that exist beneath the surface of electoral politics, gradually reshaping the terrain itself. What Schumer did was bring one of those developments to the surface. He said, this matters. Pay attention. This is real. And now, the question becomes, what does the country do with that information? Because that's the thing about political narratives in this era. They're not simply descriptive. They're not simply reporting what happened. They're doing something active. They're shaping what comes next. Schumer's intervention suggests that there are still people in positions of power who believe that democracy requires democracy itself to be defended through visibility, through naming threats, through transparent discussion of how power is actually being consolidated. It suggests that someone, at least, still thinks the old tools matter, that words matter. That honesty matters. That calling something out matters, even if it doesn't immediately change the outcome. Whether that's enough, whether that can adequately address what's being built, that remains to be seen. But we know now that it's being built, and we know who's building it. And we know, because Schumer told us, that it matters. That's where we are.